Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live YouTube stream here from AutoCrit. If you're not familiar with AutoCrit, we are the premier site for authors. We have our online writing desk, which is a powerful online writing tool which helps you plan and edit your work. We have an online community, and we have a online academy where you can learn more about becoming the best author you can be, similar to how these live streams work. Now, if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to this YouTube channel, because we're going to continue this series about fixing things that could be wrong in your book. And today I'm very excited to be talking about fixing plot holes. I know, plot holes, they can be really irritating. Plot holes can just deflate you. When somebody is experiencing your book, when they're reading your book, excuse me, and then they come back to you and they're like, yeah, that's a great story, but like on page 75, like that doesn't make any sense. And then you look at it and you're like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Great. You can get deflated because they could have unraveled something major. It could be that the little twist you put in there, well, it doesn't really make any sense logically based on what it is that you set up to that point. And now, well, you have some choices. What do? Do you toss out the whole book? Hopefully not. Do you suck it up and hope the audience doesn't notice and that person's an outlier? Probably not a good idea, right? And so this is going to be a stream about how to deal with plot holes, hopefully avoid either extreme. I'd be interested to know, though, from all of you watching live, have you ever dealt with plot holes before? Maybe even comment below. Have you ever dealt with plot holes? What has been the worst plot hole you've ever had to deal with? And how did you work it out? Have you ever been, caught with your pants down, as it were? It's frustrating. Plot holes, my greatest writing fear, right? I think one of the best ways to get past this fear is to realize it's going to happen, because there's really no way to avoid it entirely, because the only way to really avoid it entirely is to have a plot so simplistic there would be no way to have a plot hole, in which case you're probably just not trying very hard. Most stories have at least a possibility of a plot hole, so if you write enough of them, it's going to come up. There's going to be at least something that somebody could object to. They're like, well, why didn't they do this? Or why didn't they, why did this work out? Or that worked out rather conveniently, didn't it? And to some degree, we do need to talk about what even a plot hole is, right? Excuse me. For the purposes of this live stream, I'm going to define a plot hole as a unmistakable gap in logic or consistency. This is something where when somebody points it out to you, there's really no debate. The author just forgot about one of the rules, didn't care about violating one of the rules they set up, didn't care about the fact that the whole story was set in Alaska and all of a sudden they're on a beach in Hawaii. Hopefully it's not that extreme, but it's that kind of break in logic that nobody could really debate. Now, there are other things that are really more like plot nitpicks, and that's like, well, wouldn't somebody in that position really behave more like this or like that? Or why didn't they think to use this or that? Often there are excuses for those sort of nitpicks, right? If it's like an action sequence and it's like, well, why didn't they just do this? It's like, yeah, well, they're frustrated. They just didn't think of it at that moment, right? So that's not what I'm going to be talking about. I'm not going to be talking about the nitpicky comments you might get from people. I'm going to talk about when they point out something to you and you realize, great, that actually makes it makes logical sense that what I did was very illogical based on what I set up. You got a great point. I've got to fix it. All right, I'm just looking at some of the comments here. How sweet of you to think I can recognize my own plot holes. Oh, we're going to talk about that, because no, I actually do not assume that. In fact, most of the time, they have to be pointed out to you. But we're going to discuss how to avoid that, because isn't it great if you can get ahead of somebody and discover it for yourself? I would hope that most authors have discovered it for themselves at some point, in the editing process. But that doesn't mean that you haven't given it to somebody else and had it pointed out to you later. The worst one I ever had was a character I put in there specifically to notice things, totally ignores another character, acting obviously shady. Interesting. Yes, the inconsistency of characters. That's a popular one. Are some genres more susceptible to plot holes than others? I don't know about that, but I would say some genres are more susceptible to nitpickers than others. And I mean I'm just gonna say fantasy and sci-fi. The fans have a tendency to give this more of a scrutiny than say fans of romance. And that's partly because fans of romance are not really reading so much for plot, they're more reading for character. So a character acting very out of character, yeah, you'll get nitpicked about. But sci-fi, you could get nitpicked about all kinds of things about depending on the level of scientific accuracy the audience is looking for, which is something you would want to lean into early on. Like, right, kind of, what kind of story are we writing? Are we writing a fun sci-fi where it's a little bit silly and speculative? Or are you writing more of a hard sci-fi? You try to signpost the audience early, but even so, you can make it perfectly clear that this is speculative sci-fi. I'm being a little bit silly, and you'll get that nitpick. But again, I think of that more as a nitpick than an actual plot hole because you are not really violating the rules you set up. You didn't set up that this was a rule that really worried about typical physics, for example, perhaps. I have taken plot holes and used them in ways to make the story more interesting. Yes, plot holes can often be a great opportunity because what plot holes could be pointing you to is the chance to make the story more nuanced, more detailed, and get into it. Romance fans love plot. We just never get it and have learned not to expect it. Wow. Wow, that's harsh. No, I mean, when I say that romance fans don't like, they love the plot of the wish fulfillment of the story and they love watching it unfold. I'm just saying that they're not often looking in the minutia in the same way that fantasy readers and sci-fi readers are. So that's where plot, and honestly too, it's less complicated in terms of the ability of the author to paint themselves into a corner, right? Romance sci-fi is the way to go. No, it's the because sci-fi, you have to set up every technology you're introducing, you have to set up the whole world. So it's a lot easier to come up with a plot hole because you can forget that, hey, wait a minute, why didn't they just use that device you established on chapter 1? Romance, it's less likely you're gonna make that mistake. So I just think it's a genre that's less common gonna have a plot hole. I would say where plot holes tend to happen in something like romance tends to be more of contrivances. And that is a bane of existence. And romance readers don't like that. They don't like it when the big thing that's keeping the couple apart is just something dumb, like they don't want to talk to each other or something. That's frustrating. Okay, so the first thing we want to ask ourselves is, do you know your plot? Do you even know enough about your plot to know if there would be a plot hole? Even if somebody pointed it out to you? Well, I hope the answer is yes. But it might not be yes, because a lot of us are pantsers or discovery writers or gardeners or all of that stuff. No, I love it. Yes. Generally speaking, you're not going to be able to stop plot holes happening in first drafts or second drafts or third drafts, etc. It takes a while. So this is why it can be very frustrating because we often don't notice them until quite late into the process. And at that point, we're quite glued to a lot of things. And so it's painful when somebody discovers them. So what I would suggest you do to avoid this painful experience is once you get past your first draft and you're doing that developmental edit that we all recommend, you take a step back and you outline. I know. It's like, I expect the boos to come in. Boo! But technically speaking, everybody outlines. It's just people who discovery write or pants write outlines that are super, super long and they're way too complicated and they need to be reduced. So essentially what you want to do is you want to find out what is going on in your story. Now, when I say outline, I don't mean anything that complicated. I actually want to go at a really high level because those are the types of plot holes that people are going to think about. Because what you need to do is you need to think about what mattered in every scene, like in a major set piece action sort of way, especially when it comes to the character's main journey. I think a plot hole that solves like a little side quest story or a subplot, that's not the best, but that often isn't going to kill you. What's going to kill you are big plot holes that affect the main character's attempt to get past the big obstacle, right? That is what is going to bother people. You said the word. I know. Ooh, I like outlines, and immediately the hatred descends upon. I like outlines too. That's probably not a surprise, considering I mention them all the time. I also like outlines. No, the thing is that so take a step back and do that outline, right? And try to track, especially the main character, and what it is they needed to do to get past the obstacle. Okay. That being said, is that going to tell you where the plot holes are? No, probably not, because you probably wrote something that at least made logical sense in theory. I would think so, right? You had a cause and effect. If not, then you got to fix that first. That's not a plot hole problem. That's just a plot problem. So, have a coherent plot and then start to look for holes. How do you do that? Okay, so tracking everything. Yes, this is the fun part. You need to track everything that is you have and it has like track everything. Yes, every cat, every leaf that falls. No, I'm talking about anything that could affect the obstacle in a major way, right? So this is how you can avoid the, well, why did they just use a whatever? Did you introduce the fact that they have, I don't, they have the magical ability to breathe underwater, and then they get to a scene and there's a lake and they're like, this lake is way too big, I don't know how to get past it, and you just forgot? you know Put in that sort of information. That's the sort of tracking that you need to do. Yes, it is hard. What makes it easier is to either do this more as you go. So I'm not expecting you to outline in advance, but as you go, every time you introduce something that's kind of major, that kind of has world possibilities. It's not like they decided to have turkey that day instead of roast beef or something. It's more of, did they learn about the fact that you can breathe underwater or something like that. You'll want to write it down. Now, if you are an AutoCrit member, you can do this in the writer's desk. You just open up a little note and then you go boop, and then you can put it on the side. Isn't that great? Yes, and you can track all these things. So yes, you should use AutoCrit handy dandy now. I love it. Thank you. You're doing my job for me. Someone suggests writing your summary as you write your book. Yes, I would say so. Essentially, yes. I know some people like to do that every time they write a chapter. They go back and do that just to see where they were. Sure. But the main thing that you really need to do is not worry about summarizing everything. When it says tracking everything, I mean everything as pertains to the main journey of getting past that obstacle, because that's what's really going to matter. Most people don't care if a plot hole solves something that's not consequential, right? Not that you shouldn't avoid it. You shouldn't avoid it, but that's really where it's going to ding you. And those sort of things too, if it's not consequential, much easier to fix. It's the consequential plot holes that are like, I can't do this. All right, setting. So this is some of the things you want to track. You want to track your setting, in which case, if you have created a whole world, I hope that you have some sort of basic idea of what it looks like in terms of its geography and things like that. That's a very easy way you can have a plot hole. You can, in one chapter, say, this house was on a mountainside. And in the next one, they're like walking out the front door and it's the beach and you just forgot where it was. Yeah, this is something you might want to write down. Like where is it taking place? Especially anything that's going to matter. Again, if you forgot and one scene they walk out and it's the beach and the readers read it and they're like, wait a minute, it's not the beach, and it didn't really matter to the plot, well then it's easy, you just go and you fix it, right? But if it mattered to the plot, if it mattered to what's going to happen, then yeah, it better be that the house is on the beach, right? Because otherwise that big epic scene with the kraken at the end of the story, well, that's not going to work. Yes, a map is a great thing to do, but I don't like to necessarily say draw a map in case you're going to get nervous as an audience that I'm expecting that you're going to have beautiful artwork. I mean, like, go into paint and like draw an outline, do your stick figures. What you're doing is you're just keeping track of something. Yes. Add emojis. I love that. All right. Objects, right? This, anything that's going to be useful. Again, it's not necessarily important that I know that they own a yellow shirt or not. Maybe, but if it has something to do with the plot, then yes, I do need to know that, right? Let's say it's a monster plot and the monster hates the color yellow for some reason, right? And they're like, oh no, what will I do? And I'll be like, yeah, but you had a yellow shirt on earlier, why don't you just put that on? See? So, you have to think about what could be implied in that main conflict. Again, you don't have to track everything, but those are the things that people are going to notice. Role changes. This is what Wendy was talking about. Her biggest problem, well, sort of. She said her biggest problem was knowledge. We'll get to that in a moment. But one of the biggest problems is that people will behave in a way the audience doesn't expect. Now, this could either mean that your audience is wrong. Yes, the audience is wrong. No, but like your characters, and yes, they would behave like that, but the audience just didn't suspect that. Well, I would say if that's the case where they're coming back to you, that's probably going to be pretty easy to fix. You may just have to tweak some things up to that moment, so it's not the end of the world. However, if you have a major thing that you establish, like, this person is scared of heights, and then there's a scene where they just climb up to a really tall place and it's not acknowledged at all, people are going to wonder. And again, if they have to climb up to it because it's important to the getting past the obstacle, well, you should be tracking this, right? And then you'd be like, well, what did they have to do to get past the obstacle, right? And it's like, well, did I establish that this makes sense, or did I have other opportunities to get past the obstacle I didn't bring up? This is where it really gets to you, because again, if you write the whole story, if you get it through 80 million drafts and you give it to a beta reader and they're like, hey, wait a minute, aren't they scared of heights? And it didn't really matter. Then you can either change it and get rid of the part where they'll go up to a high place, or you can just acknowledge it and they push through it and they move on. You can see how this works, right? Because you're not necessarily going to stamp out every little thing, right? Because that's going to be hard. It's a lot to track. But what you can do is stomp out the big things that are really hard to fix later. That's what I'm getting at. Now, here's another thing that happens is knowledge problems. This is like an age-old issue with human beings in general. I think it's called the knowledge paradox. But anyway, the idea is that once you learn something, it's hard to remember the unlearned state. It's hard to remember that anybody didn't know it at all. And we all know that people have to learn things, but we kind of don't acknowledge it completely. An example is that most people, once they learn how to use technology or like a cell phone, will overestimate how fast it is going to take somebody else to learn it. So when they learn it slowly, they're like, it's so easy, but they forget that they were once that person and they probably didn't learn it any slower than they did, right? Because even though we have that in the back of their mind that there's something that has to be learned, we just can't fully grasp it. Children often don't get this idea at all. They don't understand what the unlearned state. It's something that kind of comes later. Anyway, this can happen to you as an author, because you know what you know about your story. You don't know what the audience doesn't know about the story. And you also don't know necessarily what the characters know about the story. So you can just forget that you didn't establish the fact that this person, 30 miles away from where the action is taking place, had no idea of a conversation that took place 2 scenes ago. And somebody might point this out and they would be like, wait a minute, how would they know that's going on? They weren't in that conversation. Are they do they have telepathy? What's going on? And this can be an issue. Now, I will say, if you've established it to the audience that it's what's going on, often audiences don't catch on this either. There's lots of times that I've professional stories where it's like, how in the world did that person know it? But because I knew it as an audience member, nobody's going to question it. But I would say you should question it. When somebody is talking from their knowledge, this is just something to always ask yourself. How do they know this? Right? Just all the time. Just especially when you're doing your developmental edit. How do they know this? And I'm not saying you have to let the audience know, because if there's an obvious answer, then the audience can think of that obvious answer too. And even if it's a less obvious answer, as long as it's not super convoluted, then I don't think the audience has to know. But if it's a rather convoluted thing that would be the way they would know it, it's like, well, actually, in my mind, I thought that they bugged the phone of the person. You need to kind of establish that somehow, right? Because otherwise somebody is going to be confused. Just write a montage. Yes, it's always a montage. Cut to the B-roll footage. Okay. Looking at the consequences of your plot twist. Okay, so we're going to move on now. We're going to move on from the tracking, what to track. And we're going to look at when you outline your whole plot, you're going to have those little pivot points, those beats, those points in which the story shifts. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the consequences. And what we want to make sure is that we followed up with the consequences throughout. So you just kind of go through. This is why having that high level outline is really helpful. Because you can't just read you could, but you wouldn't want to have to just read your book a whole bunch of times every time, tracking every time. No, you want to go up to that high level and then look at all the plot points, like one or two sentences for each of them. Maybe it's like 40 sentences altogether is what you're looking at in terms of the plot. Because this is going to get rid of, like I said, what we're trying to get rid of before we get to the beta readers is those really awful plot twists or plot holes that cause you to have to rewrite the whole thing, which unfortunately can happen. All right. And that's the worst. So we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to get ahead of that. And if we can find it at this point, then we at least haven't gotten that married to the specific wording of scenes. We can play with it a lot more. We haven't gotten that excited by it. One of my CPs asked me, who is this Diane character? I was sure I'd already introduced her until I searched for Diane, and the first mention was the sentence that they pointed out. Yeah, that's getting back to the illusion of knowledge, right? But what you want to do is you want to look at, like I said, the consequences of any plot twist. Any plot twist worth its salt has consequences. Otherwise, it's not really a twist, right? But those are the big moments, and then it's like, okay, from that point on, am I being consistent with that? And then go back. From that point, I'm inconsistent with this. Okay, from that point, I'm consistent with that. And at least then, moving forward, you've gotten it. Now the question is going backwards. We'll get to that in a moment. That's a different type of plot twist. That gets to secrets and luck. Yes. Secrets. When plot twists are revealed as secrets, I have a general thought about secrets, which is that I think authors overestimate them, especially newer authors. I think they overestimate how fun it is to have a secret, because it's like, ooh, I'm going to have this big thing that's going to take place 2/3 of the book. It's going to change your mind. It's going to blow your head. It's going to be amazing. And yeah, sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's true that a huge reveal is going to level your audience, and they'll just love you for it, and they'll just be like, wow, and they'll give the book to somebody else and like, oh, it's great, especially, well, I can't tell you, but it's great, sure. But often secrets are just a big lie to the audience until you get to the point that the secret is revealed. They're living in a fake world. It's a world that they don't understand. If a secret matters, right? If there's any major secret to be revealed, until then they're living in an illusion. So the question is how are they going to feel when that illusion is obliterated? Are they going to think, wow, I wish that I had been living in reality this whole time because it's way more interesting? In which case, why don't you not make it a secret? Because it doesn't have to not be a secret to the main character. It could still be a secret to the main character. I'm talking about a secret to us, right? Okay. And then the other thing that you can ask yourself is, well, is the audience going to feel that everything made sense up to this point in light of the secret? An example of this is Disney's Frozen. Disney's Frozen had a big secret with the villain. And in my opinion, I'm not a fan, because I feel like the movie does you a disservice to make you in the dark in order to have its big old secret. And I don't necessarily know what major advantage there was to it, to be honest. It did give a nice moment in the audience when I saw it, and they're like, whoa. But I don't think when you rewatch it and all of that, it really works that well. And I just don't really think it did an awful lot. And that's the kind of secret that I'm concerned about. Now you could say, well, Daniel, Frozen was a smash hit and kids loved it and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, fair enough. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying you got to be careful with it, right? And people thought of it as a plot hole because they can point to scenes in which the villainous character does not act as you would expect a villainous character to act. For one, the villainous character says that they want to kill another character, and there's another scene where they had plenty of opportunity to do it, and they didn't do it in that situation. And you're like, well, why not? It would have been really convenient. And you could say, well, they didn't want to blow their cover and blah, 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 blah. but they didn't even have to do it directly. They prevented somebody else from doing it. So it's very strange, and it just feels cheap to me. So one person said they dislike it when stories are written to write around a big twist and things don't make sense. Yes, this is what we're trying to avoid. What we're trying to avoid is something like that. People have made the same criticism of Shyamalan's The Village, right? Shyamalan got into the habit of writing huge twists because of The Sixth Sense. And the twist in The Village, a lot of people say, yeah, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, you get to the end and you're like, that's really convoluted and you kind of lied to me the whole time and I don't like that and it's dumb. Like, there are people that like the movie, but I'm just saying that got a lot of feedback like that. So secrets can be a plot hole is what I'm saying, because what they can do is they can make everybody read back to what reality would have been up to the secret, and if it doesn't make sense, then it's a plot hole. So if you do have a big secret, do that for them. Go back through and make sure that even though it may not reveal what the secret is, right, because it's a secret, did it at least make sense to where you can be like, oh, I've got to read this again, and everything will make sense up to the point where the secret is revealed. If that's the case, then you don't have a plot hole. It still might not be a good idea to have the secret, but that's another conversation. All right, luck. Yes, luck is often viewed as a plot hole, which it's not necessarily technically a plot hole. It's more of a nitpick, because technically it's not really blowing a hole in your plot to just be like, and all of a sudden, I inherited $1 million and my problems are solved. It doesn't really break a hole in the plot because your plot never established that wasn't possible, right? But the problem is the plot never really established that it was possible, and it doesn't feel very realistic. And so if the tone of the story is something that has weight and gravity, and all of a sudden you have this strange, fanciful, sort of convenient settling, it feels cheap and it feels like a hole. It feels like it's not what I signed up for. I will say that bad luck is usually accepted. I've said this before, but I think I got it from the writers of Pirates of the Caribbean that they said this. They said, uh, well, uh, well, they also said anything that a character knows for the sake of it being funny is always accepted by the audience, even if it doesn't make sense, which kind of goes back to the knowledge thing. So, like, they have a scene where the characters are being very eloquent and they're like, yeah, it doesn't really make sense that they're super eloquent. No, but it's funny. And so everybody doesn't care. But I would say anything that is a coincidence and it results in bad consequences, we generally accept because we are pessimistic and we think that that is what happens in life, that there's all kinds of coincidences that work out to our detriment. We don't really think that a lot of good things work out for our benefit, and you could say whatever that is about the human species, but we just tend to find it less believable. Just try it out sometime. Go up to, like, do a test, go up to a few random people and tell them a story that's a coincidence and things go really badly, and see if they believe you, and see how outlandish you can make it, and then do the reverse. I bet you'll find a lot more people will believe the outlandishly bad story. Just try it. It's fun. Unexpected resolutions. Yes, this kind of gets back to these sort of luck and tricks and things like that. But what you don't want to have in terms of a plot hole is something were to solve the problem that nobody expected. It kind of gets back into luck. Or it gets into characters behave differently than you expect. And it's like, well, why would they all of a sudden decide to be nice now? Really? Like, is that really what's going to happen? It seems awfully convenient, right? And again, this can border more on a nitpick than a plot hole. It depends on how unexpected it is. Now, if it's unexpected because you previously set up this is impossible, then yes, it's a plot hole. So keep in mind what you're setting up is impossible. Like, reverse engineer that, right? Figure out in your story, what have you set up is, this is something that can never happen, and then find out if it happens. And honestly, when stories set up, this is something that can never happen, often what we think of is, well, it's probably going to happen, right? Because why else would they say that? And so to some degree, we're expecting it, but how it happens, it can't just happen. There needs to be like, this changed, and so therefore this happened. Right. So it's like, nobody can ever do this magical charm while riding a dragon. And it's like, well, I know somebody's going to do it at the end of the story. And then what happens is you figure it out that they learned some sort of twist. They got particularly angry. They got particularly focused. Their relationship with their dragon is just that great, and so the dragon stays steady. Whatever it is, right? And so then it's just they're accomplishing something great. But what you don't want to have is them say, nobody can ever do magic on top of a flying dragon. And then there's a scene in there on flying dragon, and they're like, and they do it, and then they're like, and then nobody acknowledges it, and you're like, well, wait a minute, didn't you just establish that already? In sci-fi, technology can happen or not. Yes, unexpected elements of technology or magic is kind of this, right? You can set up a technology or a magic, which magic and technology are very similar in when you get advanced, there's not much difference. Arthur C. Clarke, but what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't say, well, the technology is capable of doing X, 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 and then all of a sudden it does Y, and you're like, well, where did that come from? And they're like, I don't know, it's just cooler than we thought. It's like that doesn't really work. You don't want to lose the wow factor, right? That cuts into going beyond the expectations, right? There's two different ways there's a few different ways. I guess I should say three. There's the completely unexpected, like I never saw that coming a mile away, which you can get away with as long as it's unexpected just because you didn't bring it up as a possibility, which is not the same thing as defying something that you said isn't a possibility, right? That's where it's hairier. And then you can have the unexpected combination of things. I didn't expect that this would make this, right? That works well. Or the recontextualization of it. I didn't expect this in this context would equal this, right? It's kind of like uh, the old school, you put chocolate on my peanut butter joke, right? That's cool. That sort of wow factor can happen. Or it's just I thought it would be cool, but actually it's way more cooler in real life than I expected. Right. So those are the ways you can have the wow factor. But what I don't recommend is just like keeping the audience on their toes by just doing anything. Because I would say that often doesn't end up in a wow factor. It's more like a huh factor. And it's not that stand up and cheer moment. If you think of the stand up and cheer moments you've had in movies and stuff like that, they're probably, in books, they're probably not things that came completely out of left field. They're usually stuff that's at least somewhat set up. I mean, a one that happened recently, this is maybe not the best example, but Jurassic World. A lot of people really love the way that movie ends, where you have the big battle and the dinosaurs are fighting, and then the mosasaurus jumps out and it grabs it. That's not like completely not set up. It's just you forgot that that character was there. It's completely set up, and they actually didn't do very much with that character the whole time, right? And so it just fell off your radar. But the fact that it does that, it's like, yeah, especially for that sort of monster movie sort of thing, right? That's like the ultimate yeah moment. But if it had been like a random dinosaur that nobody had brought up before, or if all of a sudden one of the dinosaurs like exhibited abilities they hadn't up to that point, I don't think it would be that sort of stand up and cheer moment. It would just be more like, huh, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that, right? What you really love is like, oh, I forgot. That was so bro. That's what you want. So I would say it's not completely unexpected. Probably won't get you to that wow factor. Okay. I already have unexpected resolutions. All right. So what about what about when you get to the point and you've written the whole thing and you find that plot hole and you don't really know how to fix it without unraveling just way too much, and you're not even sure if it's worth it because you do have sort of a wow moment? Well, there's the old writer concept, hang a lantern on it. And what that means is you're acknowledging to the audience that, yep, I understand. You got to give me this, but don't you want to? Isn't it fun? And this is where you can get to the things like I didn't know that the magic could do that. And maybe you don't want to actually foreshadow it that much because you want to have that whoa moment. Okay. But then after it happens, you have somebody be like, wait a minute. And they're like, I know, right? Wasn't that crazy? And then the audience is like, okay, at least the writer understands that this is kind of out of nowhere. And that can work. You do have to be careful with it though, right? Because it's kind of like the people that tell a bad joke, like, haha, wasn't that a bad joke? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And you're like, yeah, no, it's not a very funny joke. And sometimes it can make a not funny joke funny, right? So you can also make a kind of clunky plot work if you kind of do the, haha, are we having fun? but you got to be careful because you can also just look like you don't care, or you're not spending effort, or you are insulting the intelligence of the audience. There was a raptor riding a T-Rex. The cool factor was so high it needed no explanation. Fair enough. Fair enough. You can also distract. This is another technique. If you have something that is going to be a plot hole and you're like, yeah, this doesn't really make sense, but I don't know another way to do it, and I gotta get it through, then, oh, look at this shiny object over here. Are you noticing? Yeah, you can do that. Do I recommend it? Again, it depends on why you're doing it. Ask yourself, why are you torturing yourself to keep this plot hole? Why? What does it matter? Because there might be a better way to fill it. There could just be a simpler explanation, a less complicated explanation. Go back and figure out all the tools you had up to this point. Is it possible to do it a different way? Sometimes it's a matter of a different character, right? It's like you forgot that this character has this skill and this character has a different skill. And so the character A skill is not, that character is not present in the scene. And then character B has to do the A skill and you haven't established that. Which either means you can go back and fix it, right? Or you can actually just change who it is. You can do that. Darlings are painful to kill. You'd rather yell at the audience than her. Yes, but I mean, this isn't yelling at the audience. It's just doing a tap dance and hope they don't care about the fact that your darling is not that attractive. Fill it with another character. Yes, that's often a way to go for sure. Um, what was I going to say next? Because I lost my train of thought with characters. There was something I was going to talk about, and that is yes, a character internal logic with the characters is really important, making sure they maintain their motivation and goal. But that is not what I was trying to get at. Let me see here. Well, I was really trying to think of specifically because now we're kind of at the point where I'm out of the easy solutions. I'm at the point in which you're having to figure out, okay, let's imagine that, there's really no easy way out because this plot hole establishes is part of a twist, and the outcome of the twist impacts the entire rest of the story. Okay. So you have to ask yourself how to plug it. In that case, if you don't want to have to throw out the rest of your story, like I said, you can go back and then you can make it not a plot hole anymore. Because whatever rule it's breaking will make it not break. Because probably why it's breaking a rule is because you wanted it to be a twist rather than inevitable, right? Because you wanted it to be a little bit unexpected. Or maybe, you were just discovery writing and you didn't realize that you broke your own rule. In which case, well, that's no big deal. Just don't set up that you're breaking up that rule in the first place. Adjust it, fix that rule. And if you're like, well, I can't fix that rule in general because if I do that, then this is just a one-shot example. Okay, well then come up with a convoluted reason why this is a one-shot example. Right? And if you think that's really overly complicated, well, then ask yourself whether or not you need that rule or if you can survive with it. Actually, this is normal, right? You got to go back. You're going to have to find a compromise because if it's that big of a thing where, like I said, the story is going to rise and fall on it and you made that major of an error, then that means there's something fundamentally at the center of the story that's rather broken. And so I would really look into that. I would definitely avoid the distraction technique in that sort of situation. The distraction technique tends to work for little ones where it doesn't really matter all that much. It's kind of like the comedic things. It's like you could make this convoluted reason of how the character gets the information that they need to in order to resolve this subplot, but it's going to be so hard. You just want them to know. So what do? They're like, they just spit it out and the other person's like, I had no idea how you know that, and the other character's like, I don't know, I just guessed or whatever. And they're like, okay, I'll go with it, sure. Find a magic spell left on the sidewalk. Exactly. I mean, you can all point to stories that do these sort of things. Like, it's not the end of the world every time. I'm not saying it's a good idea to always settle. I do challenge people to try to do the best they can, try to avoid these things. But in the end, these are stories. This is fun. The audience is often willing to go along with a little bit of contrivance as long as it's working overall. Can you use dialogue to work through a plot hole? Of course you can. Because it depends on what the plot hole is. But let's say the plot hole is a violation of a rule. Well, then the dialogue can establish why this is not actually a violation. They can say, well, usually you can't do it, but because of blah, 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 it actually works. Okay. And then the audience is like, thanks. And often that's not, you don't even need it. You're like, okay, I would have just gone with it. So yes, you can do that. The other thing is you can use it to remind the audience of something. Like, for example, let's say the character gets to a point and they have to hack a computer. You never established that they didn't know how to hack a computer. So somebody might think it's really convenient. They're like, well, how did they know how to hack a computer? Well, I mean, you could decide you put it in the exposition beforehand, or you could decide in that moment they're like, my old years of whatever are finally coming off, and everyone's like, oh, okay, cool, they're a hacker too. Isn't that interesting? And then and then they go ahead and they do it, often when you introduce exactly what you need right before it happens, makes the audience feel like you didn't think of it in advance. And even if you didn't, you don't necessarily want the audience to think that. We want to play this game where the audience thinks, oh, you planned this out all in advance. This is your tome. This is your masterpiece. You've been planning it since you were a baby. So everything is all meticulous, right? That's kind of the illusion we want to give often. And so, yeah, you may want to go back and actually foreshadow it. Foreshadowing often fixes a lot of these things, because what it does is it makes it not come out of left field. The Eagles were proud. They totally would have tried to steal the ring. Yes, I do think the Eagles Mount Doom plot hole is not as big of a deal as some people make it out to be. It doesn't really bother me, because also, wouldn't Sauron be kind of like, oh, look, it's this big flying brigade moving exactly towards where you would destroy the ring. I wonder what they could possibly be up to. I feel like, to the all-seeing eye, like, you kind of need demure, like little people moving, and it's what you don't expect. It's kind of like the Death Star concept, right? And to some degree, that's kind of a contrivance, where it's like, well, the villain doesn't expect the most the least powerful sort of character, because that makes the least powerful character able to face the villain. And isn't that beautiful from a heroic perspective? But it's also kind of true, right? We can all think of the idea where the big honcho might not notice the janitor who ends up being the one who poisons their coffee and overthrows the throne or something like that. That kind of idea, that seems pretty plausible, that often happens, right? That people who reach a certain level of power don't really know how to notice the people that are on the lower end of the power. So to me, I think it speaks to, it's just too good. It's also just too good of a story not to want it to be that way. But I also think it also makes sense that, he wouldn't have noticed that, but he would have noticed something else. So to me, it doesn't really bother me that much. They use distraction. I love how I can work in something inconsequential story and it becomes a plot element. Yes, I've mentioned this before. One great way of doing this is through humor, because jokes will mask double meaning, because you can use a joke to be a joke, but then it can also introduce something else. So if you can introduce something through a joke, often the audience doesn't think of the fact that it's also exposition or foreshadowing. They're just like, oh, that's funny. And then actually it comes through. And those can be really great moments. Bird would be a benevolent dictator. Wow. Children's Television Workshop has now pulled this video. All right. So, yes, this is a live screenshot from one of my fantasy courses. Isn't it fun? But yes, Fantasy Club is going to be meeting this evening at 7 p.m. We have a special treat for everybody joining for the Fantasy Club. And that is tonight, we're going to be doing some live feedback. Me particularly. So if you are an AutoCrit Pro member, and if you're not, will become one, you can join us at 7 p.m. and you can submit your first page for a live critique. Or if you can't be there live and you want to watch the recording later, go into the community and sorry, I've got a block of spam here. Okay. Go into the community and post it, or you can send it to me from there. You just click my name, Daniel. Hi, I'm Daniel. You just click my picture, and then you can send it through a personal message if you don't want it just out there floating on the internet. Understandable as well. But yes, fantasy club also fun. Is this also for people taking the fantasy course? Yes, if you are currently enrolled in the fantasy course, you are a AutoCrit Pro member. Congratulations. So you can join us as well. Bert and Ernie as ring wraiths. Sounds like a text to image prompt sort of thing. Somebody's gonna run it. Go ahead. Um, you sent the patient my email. That's okay. I do read my email, so you're okay. I gotcha. Uh, so I'll be there tonight. Tomorrow on horror, we have Adam Millard, I believe is his name. I don't want to get the name wrong. My apologies. I do not read horror, so the name is, yes, it is Adam Millard. Yes, Adam Millard with Gareth, and they will be discussing horror. I believe he is somebody who does comedic horror, which is a fun combination of things. So if you want to check that out, again, it is a part of your AutoCrit Pro membership. Next week, we're going to finish up fixing things. Yes, Fix It Daniel will be packing up my hammer and tools. It's so funny if you don't think it's like hammer and tools. What a joke. Okay. But anyway, Fix It Daniel will be dealing with how to fix your ending. And this sort of ties into this, some of the stuff we brought up. We're going to bring up again a little bit more, but I'll go into more detail about foreshadowing and things like that, and making it and fulfilling audience expectation, and kind of the inevitable, but the inevitable unexpected, and the paradox of that and the fun of that. We're going to discuss all of that. So if you have any specific questions, though, about endings that you have always wanted to have solved, well, go ahead over to autocrit.com, click in the community, go to the forums, and actually, I'll go ahead and make a thread right now, and I will put in a thread. It's like questions about how to fix your ending. Yes, and I'll go ahead and post that in just a second, and then you can go ahead and join it. In fact, wait, hold on. I'll just make it very quick. Here, here, it's like live writing. Isn't this fun? Here is a thread to ask me any questions about how to make sure your novel has a great ending. Perfect. All right, so it's all in. I'm going to copy, and this is going to go in the chat. Ta-da! So yes, go ahead, funnel in over there, and ask some questions, and then I can try to deal with them later. Am I gonna wear my Bob the Builder cut? I haven't been wearing my Bob. I did that for world building, and that was just back in August. So I do need to get into more costumes, though, don't I? Maybe in January I'll try to do more costumes. We do have a great challenge coming up in January. It's going to be a kind of a flash fiction short story challenge, similar to the right fright challenge. A short length, 1,000 words. But we're going to incorporate some elements from Destination Unknown, give you some twists. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to involve the community in it. You get to decide some of the ways that the challenge unfolds. We'll do little flash fiction events throughout January. The idea is we want to give you little oh, you need, okay, yes, Tammy, I did get that email, and you will get that today. I apologize. Thank you for reminding me about that. What was I saying? Oh, we're gonna do a little flash fiction content. The idea is that 2023, it's gonna be your year. It's gonna be your year that you're gonna get more writing done. You're gonna be the most productive you've ever been. New Year's resolution. Let's go, everybody. And so we want to give you some nice little projects to get going. So give you some easy wins out of your, under your belt, to give you some momentum to see you through the year. So that is what we are going to do. Distraction. Yes, we're trying to avoid distractions in terms of our writing. We're trying to get you back to the keyboard and working. No worries. You've decided it's your thing now. That's okay. Yeah, no. I have to do like 80 million things at once a lot of the time around the house, so I'm used to like back and forth and all of that stuff. Yes, 2023 or bust. So next week you'll get more details about that. You'll also, if you're an AutoCrit member, you'll get more information through email and through the dashboard and the hub and all of that. Beats, yes, beats. Thank you. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And if there's anything you would like, because that's the theme, right? The theme is kind of new year, new you. You're not completely new. Renewed you. How about renewed you? It's renewed year, renewed you. What would you like to discuss in terms of things that would help you become the best author you can be in 2023? Go ahead, comment below, throw it in the chat. Let me know what are some of the things that you would like us to discuss as a part of anything that you think is a bit of a block, a hindrance, an inconvenience, whatever it is that keeps you from being the best writer possible. How long do I consider the first page to be? Interesting. Generally, if somebody gives it to me in like an extended format, I just drop it into Word with like 12-point font and just something like that. Yes, we are actually. That's going to be one of our streams. Thank you so much for the idea, Tammy. That is going to be one of the streams in January. Look at that. You asked, we listened. But no, it was a great idea. I loved it. So we'll definitely have that. And actually, we'll have a fun little video to go with that in the community as well that I've been working on. And I get to dress up as a chef and everything. It's lots of fun. Costumes. That's one thing I want to do. Maybe 1 month we'll do that. It's like the story chef month. And I can like talk about writing and then maybe also cook. And then we can throw in the beet cake. Look at that. All right. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoyed this show, please like and subscribe. Next week, we're going to be talking about endings. How to know when the story is finished is a great one. I think that's coming up in January as well. But if not, I will make sure. How to find yourself if you're lost in looping edits. Great. Awesome. Yes. So we will see you all next week for endings, or maybe tonight in fantasy, or maybe tomorrow in horror. Hopefully. Otherwise, bye everybody. See you around the AutoCrit community. Have a great week.